Today, I'm going to make this stocking tree, and I'm going to tell you what a stocking tree is. Let's get started. And for this project, I started at the big box store where I got some sappy lumber, and I'm going to show you how to fix that in shorthand. If you want a longer version, I'll link to a video where I explain exactly what I'm doing here and how to seal up the sap in boards like this so that it's not a problem later on in your project. And the reason why I'm starting off with such big lumber like this is because 2x4s tend to be lacking in quality, I'll say. So I'm starting off with 2x12s, and these 2x12s are a little bit better. I'm actually turning them all into about a 1x1 or a 2x2, I guess. And here you can see I only had one with that pith in the middle. That's that center part of the tree, and that's going to cause cracking and some issues down the road, so I'm going to get rid of that. A lot of 2x4s have that throughout, so going with this big lumber, I only had one strip that I needed to get rid of that was waste. And after ripping everything down, just do a little dance with my planer and clean everything up so that all of the pieces are nice and uniform and smooth, which will save me some sanding time later. So to cut the angles on top of these, I'm starting off with a quick jig. This is just a little scrap plywood, and I'm lining up a board to see exactly where do I want to set up my fence, but I forgot my screw gun. So I'm in a limbo underneath this board, so I can go get the screw gun, lock this thing down so I can make nice consistent cuts on every single one of these. And I'm doing a double taper on this, and you can see here I'm going to cut on one side and then flip it and cut the other side, and that will ultimately make a little spiky thing that they'll come together into a point at the top of the tree. So you'll see that in assembly. And I'm going to go on record and say I've never missed the trash can when I throw away the offcut. Now that I have a stop block set up so I can have consistent cuts, I'm going to set my saw to a 7-degree bevel along with the 7-degree miter. Make sure that all of those are cut nicely so that they will hit the floor, and then I'm going to cut a 7-degree, just a miter on these. These are the stretchers that are going to help keep everything in alignment. So I'm going to screw in a stretcher first, and then I'm going to go back over to the top and secure the top together with some screws. And I'm countersinking all of these, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill those later with some plugs. And you'll see how that process comes together and ultimately hides these screws so that you'll never know that they were even there. And the mating surface between the two upper portions after they dried were not quite flat enough for me, so clean it up with the block plane so I can assemble the entire structure together. And on to the next day, where I'm attaching the last two bottom stretchers here with, again, more glues and screws. And I needed to suck these together like I suck in my gut for family picture day. And I noticed that everything wasn't aligning the way that I wanted it to. So no problem, a screw can't fix. I just smashed it in there and then wiped up the excess squirt out at the end. And on these upper stretchers, I was smart and I pre-sanded instead of like the other ones where I had to get in there and hand sand everything in between those slats, which was a bit of a pain, but I got it done. I didn't show you guys that process. And on to the fun part, drilling out a bunch of plugs and then cutting them off of that little board there on the bandsaw. I love this process, the way that they just kind of fall out all over the table there. And then the best part is, afterward, you see this little thing? I don't know why, but I had this urge to keep it. I felt like I was going to get some kind of joy out of that in the future. So it's sitting over there in my scrap bin. I don't know what I'm going to turn that into. And after all of those plugs are installed, you have to trim them flush to the surface. So one way is with a little flush trim saw. Who would have thought of it? Those work pretty well. They need a little bit of sanding afterward, of course. I mean, all of these methods do. Next is a nice sharp chisel, which I think gives you the most control, personally. I like the way that you can take off big chunks and then just come back and finely tune it and sneak up at the end. And then the block plane works okay too. It's kind of like a chisel with training wheels. It just takes a while because you don't have control over how much you want to take off without having to adjust the plane every time. And lastly is with a sander, which I don't prefer. It's noisy and it takes a while, especially on the bigger plugs, but it does work if that's all you have. This is a case where hand tools are just a little bit better because this would be very difficult to do with a power saw and dangerous. And speaking of hand saws, I'm going to cut the feet. I'm using this piece of plywood because my table is not level, so I just marked where I needed to cut, kind of scribing to that piece of plywood, and then take a saw and very carefully follow my line so that I keep all of the right angles and everything still sits nicely on the floor. And then I get to move on to finishing. And I'm going to start with a spray can of shellac to do two things. One, seal in the sap that I had dealt with earlier, and two, provide a nice even surface applying stain. So this is a gel stain that I'm brushing on, and then I'll go ahead and come back later and wipe off the excess after it's dried. I found about 40-45 minutes was a good time. And at this point, I guess I should tell you what a stocking tree is. It's nothing more than one of these obelisk type things that is going to have some hooks to hold stockings for Christmas. The client I'm building this for, they have a large family and they no longer have space on their mantle for everybody's stocking. So she wanted a place where she could still display everybody's stocking and make everybody feel included in their Christmas festivities. And right now what you're seeing is me making a cradle. I'm making one big log of them, and then I'm going to cut them up later. And right now I need to trim the bottom here using the planer to just make sure it's all nice and flat. These cradles will go over the stretchers in the stocking trees. And now that I had the entire stick put together, I'm going to nip off the end and test to see if it'll fit. And it was just a little bit too tight. So brought over the entire log there to the table saw to just rip off a slight amount on the inside, just rubbing the blade up against it to shave it off so that I have a nice tight fit, and then finish off with a little hand sanding before cutting these all down to size. And after meticulously hand sanding every single one of these small pieces, I called in some help from my good friend Cinderella, who protected my work surface while I broke out the finishing steps again on each of these little pieces here, which will bring me into my final phase of finishing, where I coated everything with about 4 coats of some spray lacquer, making sure to get any excess overspray on my neighbor's lawn. Unfortunately, these were all flatheads, so I had a fun time putting all of these in by hand, but once they were done, They fit like a glove, and this project was complete.